Morning everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for DFE Audit, a Practical Guide with Karl Bentley. I'm Kate and I'll be keeping things running in the background. While we wait for everyone to finish logging in, I'll just run through a few housekeeping points. Next slide, please, Karl. Thank you. We will be recording this session and everyone who's registered will receive a copy by email. You are muted throughout the webinar, so if you do need assistance, please just use the chat in the top right-hand panel. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar too, so please send in your questions using the question function, which you'll also find in that right-hand panel. With so many of you registered for today's session, we might not be able to respond to all questions during the webinar, but if we don't get to your question, we'll group similar questions together and share a summary of the answers with everyone after the session. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're delighted to be joined today by our guest speaker, Karl Bentley, Director of Funding Assurance at Validera. Karl's going to be guiding us through some of the key steps for effective DFE audit preparation, including advice on avoiding common pitfalls and discussing the latest areas of audit focus. We're also pleased to be joined by Aptem's Ange Metcalf, who's going to be demonstrating how Aptem can support your audit preparation process. And with that, I'll hand over to Karl.
Good morning, all. I think probably I've probably spoken at many of these over the years, whether in person or online. But as was said, I'm literally going to be giving you a little bit of insight into how the kind of the DFE funding assurance approach works. Appreciate that many providers are always kind of going, you know, oh, when is this going to happen? How is it going to happen? Why do they come knocking on the door? What I will try to do is answer some of those questions as we're going along as part of the process. And as Kate has said, if you do have any questions, if you can put them in the question section, because as it stands at the moment, all I can see are the slides. I can't actually see anything else. So what I'm going to be covering with you, basically, is a little bit of background to the approach, common issues that come up consistently in the last round of funding audits, and we're actually also finding them in the current as we're doing our what I would describe as appointed work, where providers come to us directly and we do work on their behalf, so commission work. We're still finding some of the same issues. And then a few final thoughts before I hand over to Ange to kind of how Aptem can help you resolve some of those issues. So let's do a little bit on here. 3 simple tips for starters. Always be data ready. Make sure that your ILR is clean, is up to date. Particularly things like withdrawals are processed, breaks are processed, new starts are on in a timely manner, prices are recorded accurately. It's making sure that some of these things are dealt with first and foremost as early as possible. The main reason being is that we tend to still see a lot of providers going notification, and all of a sudden that time that you wanted to rectify, sanitize, whatever you want to call it, correct your ILR, you suddenly lose all of that time, because what tends to happen is the auditor will look at you and go, I want your R12 file. And you'll suddenly realize that, oh, R12 is full of problems. What am I going to do? Know who your key players are. We don't just talk to MIS, that's who we talk to, but you may also need to understand who's looking after your learner support, who has the relationship with the employers if additional information is required, who talks to the learners. If you've got subcontracting, who deals with all that side of it as well. So it is not just about the team that submits the ILR. It is actually going to be a massive team effort, and it's just being mindful of that. You know, just because you've got to June doesn't mean that the whole place can shut down and everyone can go on holiday. And then finally, project plan. If you do get the letter and you are notified of a funding assurance review by DFE, you need to have some understanding of how long this process takes. It's not one and done. It literally will start and it will go on and on and on. And I'll explain a bit more about this and put some timelines in and some context for you, because we do tend to see that providers will sit there scratching us going, haven't you guys finished yet? And as we work way through it, you'll start to see how it all fits together. So why? This is generally one of the first questions we get. Why us? Why now? And generally, if you are in a pre-R14 audit, it's basically because your number has come up. I sometimes have visions of the Department for Education have one of those bingo caller things, and they just spin all the balls around. They take a ball out and they go, oh, look, it's this provider that we're auditing this year. So it's nothing that you've done. It's nothing to worry about. It is literally just your time for the funding assurance review. I've spoken to numerous providers who've said, can we request one? The answer simply is no. You can't go and ask for one. You can commission someone to do the piece to do a piece of work for you, but you could never request the department to come and audit you. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So what it allows the DFE to assess compliance across the sector. It uses its sample population. So effectively, it's a sample of the population to determine what issues there are in the sector. Does the sector understand everything that's written in the funding rules? If not, does it need to clarify it for future years? We also understand that there is they have to calculate a funding error across the sector, and they use the work that we identified to do that. And that fits into the work that's done by the National Audit Office, because they have to sign off the Department for Education's accounts. So basically they can say that the funding has been used for the purpose it's intended, and that they can see what the level of risk is across the sector. So it does have its purpose. You may not agree with it, but a lot of it is done to inform the sign-off of the Department for Education's accounts. And bear in mind, even though we talk about the transfer of DWP, the responsibility sits there. The audit, the budget and those sorts of things, as my understanding is, it's still sitting with the Department for Education. They are still very much in control of that. So who does it? The funding assurance reviews, we work under contract with the department. They have their own audit team. So it can be done by the department, and they tend to do their audits throughout the year. So if you are a notified pre-June, July of this year, it's more often not going to be done by the Department for Education's own auditors. Alongside that, there are 5 firms who work under contract to the Department for Education. As you can see here, it's Forces Mazars, KPMG, RSM, Validera, and WBG. I work for Validera. Previously, I spent 19 plus years working at RSM as an associate director. I'm still very hands-on. I still do the work. The idea of me sitting in an office pushing chess pieces around frightens the hell out of me, because I would be bored in no time at all. I like working with clients. I like doing the work. So I am still very much hands-on. And as you can see here, we do our work in terms of, if you are notified in June, July, the work runs from July through to November. So all of a sudden, that one and done, oh, we only see you for a week. All of a sudden, the process will start in July and will run into November. So here's an idea of basically the rough timeline that the audit firms work to for a pre-R14 and a post-R14 audit. Because just because R14 has been submitted doesn't mean that providers are completely in the clear. It doesn't mean that, oh, well, I've submitted my R14, that's it, they're not auditing me this year. Wrong. That you can still get pulled in, and you can even get pulled in as early or as late as January or February time, with the work needing to be finished before the end of March, or the core field work, again, to inform the accounts for the Department for Education. So if you were picked for pre-R14, you will get your notification sometime between May and July. Last year, it was done, I think it was the last week of June, early July. And again, that starts the clock ticking. So once you've had your notification, expect the audit firm to follow up very, very quickly after that. And effectively what we do then is an audit briefing, a planning meeting, which we try to do with you as early as possible, July, August at the latest. And this is where we will sit down with you and explain how the audit process works, deadlines, what the timeline is going to look like, what we've got to work through, what our evidence expectations are, and how the process works. And I'll cover some of those slides that we talk in those meetings a little bit later on. So once we've done your planning, we'll get your ILR file, we'll run the sample, we'll run the PD sats, we'll select our samples that were required from that as well. And that information is provided to you no more than 10 working days prior to the start of the audit. So you get 2 weeks to basically at the maximum. Now, you may find that the audit firm only gives you 5 working days, and it's because you're a single funding stream provider. So the idea is that the 10 working days is a maximum, because if you're a big GFE, then it could well be that you were looking at your study programs, your adult skills fund, we're looking at your level 3 loans, and we're looking at your apprenticeships as well. But I'll be honest, every time I've done it, I always try to work on the 10 working days so that you are allowed the maximum time available to collate all the evidence. So once you'll have that 2 weeks prior to the agreed date of the audit, when we hit the audit week itself, which is what we refer to as the field work, we have a week to do that. And effectively, we do your sample first, then we'll have discussions with you throughout that week, hopefully daily catch-up meetings to tell you what we're finding. We then do the PDSAT work review, that sort of thing, and we'll talk to you all through that process. Once that field work is finished, we then actually give you a final kind of summary of what is outstanding, where we think the issues are. And what we will ask you to do is you'll get 5 working days to basically pull together the last pieces of information that we require from you. We'll continue to work through the sample. Any additional evidence will clear queries down. Our queries may change. We may go, actually, it's a management letter point. There's no funds at risk. We can just close it down now. However, if we find that you have funding errors in your main sample or within your PDSAT review, we'll be asking you to basically do ring-fenced population checks. This is when you may hear the phrase 100% reviews. This is what we're talking about. So there are a lot of 100% reviews in 24-25. I'll come to that shortly as to why they were required. But effectively, we ask you to go away, look at a fixed list of learners with a identified issue within them. You'll go and look at those, and then you'll come back to us and say, yeah, we looked at those 50, 60, 70, 200, 600 learners, whatever it is. And you'll come back to us and go, these are the outcomes of it. These are the ones that we believe are right. These are the ones that we know are wrong. And we will then actually do a sample across the population of both right and wrong to corroborate and confirm your work. So it isn't the auditors don't do everything. We will at sometimes be kicking things back to you to go, can you take a look at this, please? Once that's done, as I say, we do our audit follow-up additional testing. Fingers crossed everything's fine. If not, it's back to the drawing board and we start the process again. And it keeps going until we are satisfied that all queries have been corrected and that the funding is correct. ILR needs to then be corrected, although you'll be doing this as you go along. So we'll then look at all of that. And effectively, we need to be in a position that we can sign your ILR off by the 22nd of October, 2026, your final R14 file to go, everything is good, we're happy, we can do that. Once we've done that, we'll then do your report, and that has to be in to the Department for Education by the 30th of November. So this was the point when I'm saying we're starting in like June, July. November, we're report writing. You get the report, you can review it for accuracy, quality, and then we need you to provide management responses, implementation dates, and who's going to be responsible for implementing those changes. All of this needs to happen, and all of this needs to be done by the 30th of November. Hence your timeline. We start in June, May, and we run through to the 30th of November. If you post R14, it's pretty much the same process. Notifications going out in October, November time. Work is kind of roughly happening. We're trying to get work kicked off December, January time. All the same deadlines as before, but we'll be working. We want work finished by the end of February, so all the 100% reviews, etc., because we have to have everything done and dusted by the 31st of March, in line with the end of the financial year. So sample sizes for an apprenticeship-only provider, we will do 30 apprentices. If you have less than 30, we'll do the whole population. And that sample of 30 will be selected statistically using the PDSAT sampler. So we don't sit there and just go, I'll have that one, that one, that one, that one. A piece of software does all the hard work for us. If you subcontract, and this is going to be an interesting one, the D9, D10 may still be on the table. So I actually should say D10 subcontracting. Because the subcontracting standard is back in play again for this year. with the idea that everything has to be submitted by the 31st of July, and the department has made a decision on whether you have or haven't met the requirements of the standard. That may still be a work in progress based on what happened in 22-23. So just be mindful that even though you've submitted your standard, and if you haven't heard from the department, if you've met the standard, if you do subcontract more than £100,000 a year, the auditors may still need to do a little bit of work on it, but it is very high level. It's very much, do you have a contract? How do you split the work? Is your declaration accurate? And again, we do spend a lot of time looking at the C1 and the PDSAT, and we do sample off those reports where we need to. And saying that one, the maximum sample size for any PDSAT report is 20, and that will be a focused audit of a particular issue. So it could be that we're looking at starts and end dates. It could be that we're looking at the with the 26A217 report, which is planned hours v actual. And in that process, we may be asking you questions of, can I have a look at your statement? Can I have a look at your off the job log? 215, can I have a look at your calculations? What other instances? But again, it will be very much about, learners withdrawing on start date. Is that accurate? Have learners come back from breaks and learning? All those sorts of things. But again, it will be very much focused on how many learners are in a report, and some of it may just be a conversation. I'd always say to you as well, and always provide this spot of an audit, provide your annotated PDSAT reports. It makes auditors' lives a little bit easier and actually answer some of our questions for us. So some other bits for you to have a think about. When do funding assurance reviews take place? If you are a pre-R14 audit, we're going to come knocking on your door in summer. We're looking to do the field work late August into September. You may have something else going on at the same time, i.e. enrollment. You may be being pushed from senior management to go, what is our R14 outturn looking at the moment? You may also be working on your R13 as well. You'll be looking at your RO2 as well. So you've submitted your RO1 for August. You may have your RO2 for the 26-27 academic year. So you will have a lot of things going on. As I said, alluded to earlier, the R12 is what we now are tending to pick our sample from. How robust is your R12? I can't stress the importance to you enough of making sure that, as we're hurtling towards the end of the academic year, now is the time to be on top of your PDSATs every month. If you've got any internal scrutiny, monitoring reports, anything like that, get running them now, get cleaning your ILR up, making sure that your data is as audit ready as it can be. Staff availability, are all the key players, as I alluded to right at the start, are they available? Is your business development manager around if you subcontract? The team that does the learning support for your apprentices, are they available? Can you access their evidence? No one is vanishing off on holiday and everything's on paper and it's in a lock filing cabinet and no one knows where the key is. It's making sure that all of those things, again, talked about this work pressures, that you've got other things going on in your life. There may well be, you're being pushed for information on the current year outside of the audit. So, there's the demands of 26-27 enrollments. What are the numbers looking like? And then you've got the audit team sitting there going, I asked you a question 3 times. Have you got me an answer yet? It's making sure that you are managing your workload. But if it is getting to a point where you need a breathing space, come and talk to the audit team first. We are the ones who will have lots of other work to be doing as well. We may be able to take a little bit of pressure off you and go, okay, let's park that for 5 minutes, and then we can come back to it when you're ready. There's other things that we can be doing, but ultimately we can't actually escape from some of those deadlines. So I'd like to throw this in there. This is the true story. This is actually one of the audits from 24-25. And this gives you an idea of when timeline starts. On the 3rd of July, the provider concerned was notified by DFE that they'd been selected for an audit. On the 15th, we contacted them. My excuse for why the delay was, we were waiting for them to tell us what was going on. But the 15th of July is because I was actually at a music festival with no telephone signal. So, and I couldn't access emails. So I actually didn't know that all this had happened before I went on annual leave and was enjoying some very loud hardcore and punk music. On the 29th, we met with them and went through the process. On the 11th of August, they gave us their ILR. On the 11th of 15th, we actually ran the samples and looked at the PD sats and did all that work on it. On the 18th, we gave them their sample, of basically the main sample and all of their PD sat stuff. Between the 18th to the 31st of August, the provider was busily collating all its evidence and uploading it to our SharePoint site, because we don't generally come on site anymore. Everything has to be made available to us, whether it's our systems you're using or your own systems. It is making sure that all of the evidence has been uploaded appropriately. Please know zip files. Zip files are a nightmare because they're sort of potential GDPR breaches, because things have to be downloaded and then unpacked. And then we have to remember that we've got to delete that and then delete our recycle bins and all those sorts of things. So we'd rather not have zip files if we can avoid it at all in all cases. And then on the 1st of August, we actually started the review. So as you can already see here, 2 months have passed before we've actually even started any work effectively. We've done, you've collated your evidence, we've picked our samples, but this is there are 2 months here where you need to be doing your project planning before we've even got to the start of the audit. So things to think about. Right, once you've got your field work finished, again, I've alluded to some of these things, but there are things that we do need to establish as the auditors. Are there any outstanding queries that need resolving? We need that additional evidence so we can clear that down. And we're back to this 5 working days post the audit, post the field work. If you don't provide us the evidence, we will immediately treat it as an error. We will bend over backwards. We will try to help you as much as we can. If it's a little bit late, we'll more often not go, okay, I'll accept it and clear it. But if I've got a month after the field work has finished and you still haven't actually provided me a response, ultimately we're going to have to treat it as an error, and that may actually result in a funding error if it's something that's totally critical to the funding. If you can't provide me an apprenticeship agreement, all funds are at risk, basically. If you can't provide me confirmation of a learner's residency, again, we could be looking at all funds at risk. So it is making sure that you are responding in a timely manner. Are there any queries in the sample that we've confirmed as funding errors? If there are, we do need to establish those 100% populations as required. So whilst I've talked about this, we can't get away from it, and when I get to the common themes from 24-25, there was a very big one that saw a lot of 100% being reviewed. If there's funding errors in the PD sats, we will need you to go and look at every learner in that report and potentially determine, are there additional funding errors in there as well? So again, it's coming at you on multiple fronts. And just that reminder, if we find an error and it's confirmed, but there's no funds at risk, we don't do additional testing. So for example, we'll report this as a management letter point. So we'll sort of say that there's a controls weakness in the organization that's caused this. So for example, 16 to 18 additional payments, you didn't make them within the 30 days. It's not a deal breaker. If you've missed something in a training plan, like you haven't put the brief description of how you're going to deliver the program, which again was quite a common theme that we had. But again, it's a controls issue. We're not going to say that this fund's at risk. We'll just literally close it down and go, right, we can just report that and we move on completely. So these 100% reviews, again, where these are taking, examples of this could be, you've got withdrawal date problems, you've got an evidence support delivery of maths and English on functional skills. LSF is quite a common one. 20% off the job hasn't been met. We actually work with you to determine that population. So we try to push as much out that shouldn't be there. Is it a particular employer? Is it a particular standard? Did we find the issue consistently in one area? If so, we'll work with you to go, actually, there's your problem. It's not everybody, it's just that one. You then got your 10 days to review, fix your ILR, and come back to us with the outcomes of that review. And we'll look at that with you. We'll sample it and we'll determine have actually all the issues been resolved. And as I say, it may be that it has to go backwards and forwards a couple of times, because when we relook at your list, we may actually say, well, actually, we think that one is wrong, or you've said it's right. We can't get to the numbers that you've got. Can you go away and take another look at it, please? And this does have to happen in every instance where we find a funding error. So it could be that we're looking at additional samples across the piece in a number of different areas as well. You know, I think the most I've ever seen is 15 additional samples where 100% reviews were required, but the 100% reviews were very focused, very ring-fenced, and we got to the bottom of them very quickly. Right, so some final bits of advice on the audit process before I get to some common themes. I can't get away from this. They take longer than people realize. If you started in July, the field work, all of the RLR corrections and everything else is an October finish. You know, effectively expect to lose July, August, September, and October to audit, unfortunately, because that's how long it takes. You know, if you're on the ball and there's lots of things done, we may actually have things done much, much earlier. You know, but we still have to work to make sure you're signed off for R14. And then there will be that gap between the R14 going in. We then start writing reports. And again, that we'll be looking to issue that to you in draft in the November, so we can issue it as a final report to the Department for Education, because they get it first, because we work for them, not you. You know, we talk about an average review, 8 to 12 weeks, depending on what we're finding. So please don't lose sight of the fact it takes an exceptionally long time to get through this process. And the R14 is, it's a date that we can't move. We have to make sure that your ILR data is 100% accurate and ready to go by that date. Right, so what I'm going to do now is pivot a little bit and talk about 3 common things that came up in the funding assurance reviews in 24-25. Right. Our first one, surprisingly for a lot, was around initial assessments and recognition of prior learning. And we still see this as a common theme coming through. And there were 3 things that were really, really jumping out at us when we did the work. So our first one is skill scans, skill radar, initial assessment, whatever it is that you're calling it in your institution, where we could see learners were scoring themselves highly, but there was no funding adjustment. So the funding band maximum was being claimed, and there was never a rationale to support the price. So the classic, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you perceive yourself against this exercise? And they were going 7, 8, 9, some instances 10. We look at that, we then look at the price and go, well, these two don't seem to correlate. You know, we can be reasonable on behaviors and go, well, okay, behaviors are intrinsically built into everything. But where we saw it in knowledge or skills, we would challenge and go, why is there no reduction in price if this learner believes themselves to be competent based on your own scoring methodology and your own process? And what you tend to find is providers coming back going, oh, actually, we did have a conversation with them. We went back to the employer. We went back to the learner. They misunderstood the process. Actually, here's lots of additional other evidence. Here's confirmation of the conversations we had. We're all sorted now, aren't we? And we're having to say to them, well, no, it's okay. You've satisfied me on that front, but it's still going to be a management letter point because you didn't appropriately document the outcomes of the assessment. So it is one to be really mindful of. Remember, it's a perception exercise. I'm not a fan of scale of 1 to 10. I prefer a much smaller scale, and I prefer to have words, i.e., I'm a new entrant, all the way through to I am competent. 1 to 10, I find it tends to be very problematic when we're auditing, because learners actually don't understand what the difference between 6 and 7 is. And learners have a bad habit of going, I'm a 7, because I don't want to overscore myself. I don't want to underscore myself. So something to have a think about. RPL calculations not being done correctly. We have a formula now from the department. We've had it since the 1st of August 2022, driven by the number of hours that the learner does not need to be taught. So a 900-hour program, they're competent for 90 hours of it. We've done a 10% reduction in the hours. We halve that to reflect fixed costs in the EPA. Therefore, we expect you to reduce the price by 5%. And we see the 5% not being done. We see that the calculation hasn't been documented. We see a reduction. We don't know where it came from. So we see underclaims and overclaims where the RPL calculation hasn't been applied correctly. And then my last point, which ties into the previous point, there seems to always be an over-reliance on spreadsheets to determine reduction values. So if a learner scores 7, the spreadsheet knocks 1.5% off. If the learner scores them 9, it knocks 2% off. There's no rhyme nor reason. It's just the spreadsheet is doing something in the background. And when we start asking about which hours did you take out of the program, well, we didn't take any hours out of the program because the learner needed to be taught everything. So why did you reduce the funding? Because the spreadsheet told me to. The spreadsheet will never replace you having a sensible conversation with the learner to determine where the price needs to be reduced based on prior qualifications, prior experience, those sorts of things. Qualifications pretty much straightforward. You can work that out. You can work what hours do not need to be taught. But the prior learning from the workplace is something you really do need to have a think about. But an over-reliance on spreadsheets, automation has proved to be a bit of an auditor's nightmare, because we've seen a lot of, I would describe as silly reductions of like 1.5%, when actually everything has been taught in the program. The learner needed to know everything, but the spreadsheet told me to do it. Right. Second one, EPA costs, TMP2. There were a lot of problems in this, and this is where all the 100% reviews were cropping up. And it's things like 20% being recorded as in the TMP2. So an estimated value, not the value that was either agreed with yourselves, where you're doing integrated programs, or where the EPAO had said, this is the price, and the learner had started in 2021, you were sticking 20% in, and the ILR has never been updated. And what was happening was that auditors will just come along and go, that's the price in the ILR, it's 20%, I'm going to go and have a look at it. Can I see the invoice for a completed learner? Or can I have a look at the price list from the EPAO? And what we were finding was that the numbers were very different. You know, if you're at £27,000, you've put 5,400 as your price, your EPA price in the ILR. And actually, when we get the price or the invoice, it was about £1,500. All of a sudden, there were massive overclaims in this area. And a lot of providers were hit by this. And there were some very, very significant recoveries into 6 figures. So it is something that providers do need to pay a bit more attention to. Again, for integrated degree programs, where did the cost come from that's been recorded in the ILR? You know, one of the conversations I had was, well, that's the difference between teaching and the funding band maximum. No, I still need to understand how much it costs to deliver the EPA. It isn't just the difference between that number and that number. Incorrect TMP2 values in the ILR when we're looking at the EPAO contract price list, those sorts of things, or the invoices. So there were a lot of things that we were seeing that were wrong. So if we've got a completed learner and there is an external EPAO, we do need to see the invoice to see how much the service actually cost and what was paid and what you're claiming. So for a completed learner, if the invoice is less than the TMP2 value, we treat it as a funding error. So my example of, let's say it's a £15,000 apprenticeship, you put £3,000 in at 20%, and it actually only cost £1,000. That is immediately treated as a £2,000 funding error. Back to our 100% reviews, I will then go and look at everybody on that standard who has a £3,000 TMP2 recorded in the ILR, and I will then look to recover £2,000 for every completed learner that is incorrect. And you can now suddenly see how the funding errors can start racking up very, very quickly. If you've had lots of completers in an academic year, you haven't updated your TMP2 price, and all of a sudden you're looking at me across the table and I'm going, this is how much I think you will need to pay back to the Department for Education. Don't lose sight of that one. Final one, where the invoice is higher than the TMP2, i.e. you haven't kept your ILR up to date and you've put £1,000 in and you actually paid £1,200, we treat that as a management letter point. The Department for Education likes to see the TMP2 value being corrected and updated. So the advice at the moment is Gateway is always a good time. Do those checks. Make sure that when you are signing learn off for everything, also if you are using an external EPAO, has the price changed? If it does, you need to fix your ILR and get the new price agreed with the employer. And you may be offsetting, you may be reducing your TMP1 to match your TMP2. So your original price agreed with the employer has not changed. If you are passing savings on, bear in mind the employer will then need to actually, the apprenticeship agreement, sorry, the apprenticeship service will need to be updated. Therefore, you need to remember that the employer will need to agree and sign it off as well. Last one I'll talk about now is just off the job. We're still seeing a lot of problems with off the job plans not demonstrating their monthly activity requirements are being met. How learners, the main reason is we need to understand how many hours a learner should have completed at any point of the program. It's very clear in 25-26 funding rules about this requirement, but it actually has been kicking around since 22-23 with the 28-day rule, the 1 month rule. You know, learners have to be engaged. Auditors, we were given a clear instruction in 24-25 from the Department for Education: go check plans, make sure that there is planned activity for every month of the practical period. So you can't lose sight of that one. It was a retrospective rule that applied to all learners before, so there is an expectation that plans have been updated in line with changes in rules. Collation of evidence, we're still seeing single sources versus multiple sources. We've seen hybrid models where we have no idea actually how many hours the learner has actually done, because I've got some stuff on registers, I've got some stuff in a spreadsheet, I've got some stuff in a log, and we're trying to fuse it all together and add it all up to make sure that the learner actually has done sufficient hours, particularly if they're a completer. Inclusion and eligible activity is still pretty common. Activity that took place pre the start date. If you've recorded an end date in the ILR, you've said, right, all the learning is finished and I've updated the ILR. Anything that happens after that, they've gone through gateway, none of that counts. Recording on a break in learning, actually had some of those last week when I was auditing a trained provider on a completed learner. And again, it could be that, oh, well, it's only 2, 3, 6, 10 hours that were taken out. But if they're borderline 20% in the old methodology, then it could well be that you may see a learner who is just over 20%, falls just below 20%, and could be subject to recovery. The registered hours one is quite a new one that's cropped up. And it's when we're looking at, if we get registers and the timesheets, what we're actually seeing is where learners are logging more hours. They're logging their daily work hours. So a learner works 40 hours a week, they do 8 hours a day, they log 8 hours, but the register only supports 6. What was happening for the other 2 hours? Some instances we're seeing where the learners are actually going, I did my taught sessions, and then for my other 2 hours, I did X, Y, and Z. If we see that, not a problem. But if there's an absence of that, we are having to say, look, we think the off-the-job logs are overstated by 2 hours, and you've based your assumptions on that. We need to see some additional evidence to make sure that these learners have met the 20% requirements. And bulk uploads, you know, learners literally doing data dumps onto systems with no narrative at all. They just will literally go, you know, my favorite is still 360 hours of dissertation. And it's like, great, but was any of it relevant? Was it new knowledge? Was it within your contracted hours? Were you doing it at the weekends? Were you doing it in the evenings? Did the employer agree to give you toil? All these sorts of things that you need to be thinking about. Again, when people start recording shadowing with no understanding of, does it meet the 4 DFE tests, i.e. it's new knowledge relevant to the standard, not maths and English, and within their contracted hours. You know, we need to understand what they were actually shadowing, what they were learning. 30 hours of attending team meetings. Team meetings hasn't been eligible since I think 23-24, you know, but it's actually, they could have learned something relevant. They just need to be wording it better. Actual hours recorded in the ILR for completed learners not supported by evidence, and again includes an eligible activity, as I said earlier. And then for those who've completed less hours, the off-the-job statements, they've been completed, but the statements actually don't contain enough information. No commentary on why a learner did less hours. And if they completed early, has there been a recalculation for, have they actually met the minimum requirement on the reduced duration effectively? If they finished 6 months early, you still need to do a recalculation based on their actual start and actual end date. So that's me done on my bit. So are there any questions?
There's quite a lot of questions, Karl, yes. So we'll fire through them as quickly as we can, and any that we can't answer now, we will get back to you at a later date. So if we're thinking about your off the job and the timesheets, one of the questions was, do the off the job timesheets require a start and an end time then of the activities to pass audit?
Preferably yes, because we are interested in when you're doing it. Are you doing it in within your contracted hours? That said, we also appreciate that things like nursing, policing, it's shift work. So if you're doing work at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's actually wholly realistic. So it is also again giving us some understanding of, you know, if learners are on shift patterns, that's been documented in the training plan to help us. But if a learner's working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and is logging time in the evening or is logging time at the weekend, do you have confirmation from the employer in particular that that learner was given that time back? You know, if they weren't given that time back and they elected to do it in that time, that does not meet the definition of off the job and fails one of the 4 tests.
Okie dokie, no problem. We've got a question now around EPA changes. We've got a couple of questions, so I'll lead into both of them. Would the change in EPA cost be updated on TMP 1 and 2 and not done as TMP 3 and 4?
You wouldn't use TMP 3 and 4 because TMP 3 and 4 is only for a change of employer.
Excellent. Okie dokie. And then there was, if TMP 2 changes, would the apprenticeship service account also need to be updated? Otherwise, the overall TMP and the ILR won't match.
Exactly. So it's that you need to make a decision with the employer. Are you because on the apprenticeship service, you just have the price. Are you keeping that original price, or are you going to pass, if, for example, if there was a reduction in the price, there's a discount, are you going to pass that to the employer, or are you going to keep the price the same and you just need to get the employer to re-agree the TMP 1-2 split, i.e. you rob Peter to pay Paul? There's lots of decisions that you've got to make, but if you're audited in an R14 and that issue is found, i.e. the price has dropped, you will have to get the employer to fix the apprenticeship service. It will be treated as a funding error immediately. So the employer will need to fix it. And if they don't fix it, you're then stuck with DLOCs. So it is, if it comes up in an audit in 25, 26, you have got to be Johnny on the spot so quickly with these employers to go, right, get onto your employers and make sure that they have agreed the new price changes. Otherwise, no one's getting paid.
And similarly, somebody has asked when RPL calculation is applied and there's an EPA change, there's the same impact and the same audit compliance checks that you'd still need to make. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okie dokie. A couple of things now, a bit of advice. Is there, sorry, I keep getting pop-ups. Is there a document that exists that shows what type of errors generate management points versus funding clawback and the percentage of funding possibility at risk? I'm not sure if something like this exists and will be largely supportive when trying to explain and train the importance of compliance. Is there anything that you advise?
Not that I mean, there's an annual document that's issued by the Department of Education of lessons learned, but I'm not sure it's ever gone into that of, I think it may give some indications of what the level of, what the, you know, is it a management letter point? Is it a funding error?
Yeah.
The thing with funding errors in apprenticeships is it tends to be, like I read something on LinkedIn yesterday where someone had actually got the wrong end of the stick completely and went, oh, only a completion payment's at risk. No, the instance that you've described there, I'd recover everything.
Yeah.
So if you don't meet minimum duration, so let's say a learner starts, goes on a break, comes back, and they haven't done 12 months, all funds are at risk because the program is ineligible. If a learner hasn't done enough off the job, they could have been on program for 3 years, but they don't have enough off the job hours, we recover everything, including what was earned in the year we're auditing and everything prior to that. It becomes ineligible. If the learner is ineligible because they don't meet the residency criteria or they don't meet the 50% in the UK, all funds are recovered. If it turns out, and this wouldn't come up in an audit, but if a learner had not been paid or the employer had not complied with minimum wage requirements, and this came up, effectively, DFE can recover its funding because the program is ineligible because the learner wasn't treated properly, even though it's something beyond your control. If the price is wrong in the ILR, then it's the difference between what the price you claimed and what the price should have been. So there are various things in, but absence of an apprenticeship agreement completely would see all funds recovered, unless you could get one.
Oh,
no, I agree. It's a fair point to probably have something like that. I always start in the point of, look, if you haven't got it, then potentially all funds could be subject to recovery. Always, that generally puts more fear into people and go, it's all right, it's only 20%. No. If we don't get this right, we could lose everything.
Everything, yeah. Okay, then. There are a lot more questions, but I just want to end on a final one because it's a little bit contentious. There are constant issues with DSAT, so therefore, how accurate can this deem to be?
The DSAT itself, you've got to bear in mind, DSAT it only runs off the indicative earnings report. It's not your actuals, so it can be slightly different, but your data is your data. If something has gone into a report, it's gone in there for a reason. Now, I know that this year is an interesting one because, and if anyone knows me, I'm a very big advocate of PDSATs. I'm an advocate of data correctness. But if you're looking at your 215 report, what it does is, and you've got a completed learner, or you've got it's pulling learners out basically who don't appear to be complying with the new requirements for minimum hours, the old Annex C. It's doing some weird stuff there, is what we've picked up, that it's pulling some learners into reports that when we look at it, they go, no, they've done sufficient hours, but because the requirements have changed from the department, it's pulling some learners in.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to be mindful of. But I appreciate, because PDSAT was down yesterday because there was a login issue or something.
Yeah.
I'd say you use it, you trust it, because it's the only tool that the auditors have got.
Yeah. So err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okie dokie. We have got a lot more questions and we will try to answer those later after the webinar, but we just need to push on now with the next part of the session. So next slide, please, Karl. Okay, so over the next few slides, what we're going to do is review how Apten can support you to reduce the risk in the three key themes that Karl's highlighted today. And we are looking, first of all, obviously, at the initial assessment recognition of prior learning. So first thing we want to have a look at is your evidence. So starting off from the beginning, when your learners are onboarding, you would be looking towards your skills radar or your skills scan. And as Karl mentioned before, it's important that you ensure that your grading against your KSB clearly reflects your occupational competence. So when you're setting your grading in Apten against your skills scan or your skills radar, being clear and determining the learner's current level of competence, which can be linked to the suitability of programme, along with robust calculations for reduction in hours, costs and duration for prior learning. And we're going to come on to the RPL calculator a little bit later. So there's always debate, as Karl's alluded to, around what the effective scale is. I'm not here to tell you what that should be, and Karl's already told you his opinion on that. I can give you a couple of examples from our customers. For example, we do have some customers who will use a 3-point scale. Now, this is usually based on the programme that's being delivered. In this case, generally it's technical delivery, that kind of thing. But you also have to take into account your organisational requirements and, most importantly, the learners that you are targeting as well. So while we have got some customers who will use a 10-point scale, a 5-point scale can be a good compromise. Although some customers prefer not to have that middle option and might opt for a 4-point scale. But the one thing that we would suggest is whatever you select, make sure it's clear enough to provide an accurate view of the learner's current occupational working level. And then that sort of leads into your learning plan and how you develop your learning plan with your KSB mapping and your off-the-job mapping as well. And what we like to be focused on really is the meticulous mapping of planned targeted learning activities that clearly meet your KSBs and have an effective number of off-the-job hours. So it clearly represents the learning activity that takes place. So what does that mean? What we mean is we're not overmapping. So essentially be clear about the skills that's actually being learned in that particular activity when mapping your KSBs. So if you've got an activity to be completed 3 times across the programme, evidence the actual targeted KSBs being met that show the new learning for each and every time. Don't just throw all of your KSBs for that module at each one of those, because that would lead to overmapping. And obviously this also helps to identify where the hours need to be reduced for RPL. So it makes that it gives you the clarity when you are doing your calculations of how many hours and where you need to remove them from. And then following from onboarding, discussions between your organisation, the learner and the employer should be happening. And that's to determine the learner's suitability for the programme. And this can be recorded within a review. This then provides you with a signed document of the outcomes from onboarding, which can be used as part of your evidence pack. And those of you that's used to using APTEM reviews will be familiar with some of the steps that we have. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them now. So within APTEM, within the reviews, you have your steps that you can use and then form your baseline in your skills scan against your KSBs. And then you can continue to use those steps throughout the programme and track the progress against those as well. Your PLR step shows qualifications achieved to date, and that's either by certificates that's being uploaded by the learner or with the integration to pull the PLR through from the LRS. Custom questions you can use and develop yourself around workplace experience or to summarise the impact of prior learning and determine the calculations for yourself. And then we do have a prior learning step to record the decision that you've made around prior learning and RPL. And what that will do is show the impact of the prior learning and the RPL are aligned, and that will pull through into your training plan document. And then eligibility questions that you may have used in onboarding. You can pull those steps through into a review, and they won't be editable, but they're there for you to view and help with the decision making around your RPL and prior learning. And we've got an example of how a review can be created in our help centre, and we've put the link on there for you. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. Yeah, when we're looking at the RPL tracker, okay, once you've identified your need for your prior learning, the RPL calculator tracker in APTEM applies those changes for you to cost and duration as well. And some of the benefits are listed on this slide. But if you are already familiar with using the PA trackers in APTEM, you'll recognise the efficiency of no longer having to manually update your ILR. The trackers also encourage a standardised process, which can be followed by all, no matter who processes the change using the tracker. There's an audit trail in the tracker, which will also date and timestamp when the changes were made and provide a clear picture for audit and compliance checking as well. And then finally, the approval process allows you to have control and provides transparency of how figures have been determined across all areas of the organisation. The document upload feature also allows additional information to be included too. So if you do have any form of documentation to support the reasons for prior learning, you can upload those into the tracker and they're all kept in one place. When you've identified the number of hours that needs to be removed from your learning plan due to RPL or prior learning, within the learning plan, you'd edit the components where you've identified the correct KSBs that's been mapped. And you can also identify the number of hours that's been pre-planned, remove those hours accordingly, and save the changes. You continue to work through the learning plan, removing the hours that's been identified as per the KSBs in the skills scan. And again, you reduce those hours, save the changes. Once you've made all of your adjustments, create a tracker. And the tracker type would be new RPL calculator. When we create that tracker, it automatically defaults to a status of new, but you can assign it to somebody to pre-authorize before assigning it to somebody to process. The basis of today, we are just going to process it ourselves, and I'm just going to assign it to myself as well. You can see here that it automatically pulls through all of the information that was attached to the programme when the learner was applied to the programme. So you've got your practical period, start and end date, your planned off the job, your planned duration, and your TMP 1 and 2. And if we scroll down, we can see the off the job hours that we've removed from the training plan automatically pulls through into the field off the job hours removed due to RPL. And you can see underneath then that gives us some various calculations, and all of those are contained within your slides and will be available to you after today. So we've got here what the remaining planned off the job hours would be, and then you can check that against your published minimum required hours and the minimum required hours based on the RPL that's actually been removed. That creates a calculation of a percentage of off the job hours that's been reduced, and that calculation is then applied across the practical period end date to give you across the duration to give you a new practical period end date, and also across the practical period price or the TMP1 to give you a new value for your TMP1 in there. And you can go ahead and use those calculations, and it's automatically updated it into those fields for you, and it gives you the reduction in planned duration, and it also gives you the reduction in your practical period price as well. Now there is an option, if we just scroll back to the top, to not adjust the duration, or to just use the funding band maximum if that's different to what your current TMP 1 and 2 value equates to. So you could select either one of those, but for the purposes of today, we're just going to go with the suggestions in here. And you can see there's a warning that tells you if you're adjusting your duration, all of your planned end dates will be pulled in your ILR. You've also got an option to upload any documents supporting this claim and the adjustments that you're making against your ILR in there. So if you do have an external calculator or anything that you're using, you can upload it in there. So I'm just going to select create. And you can see it automatically defaults to the status of process in there. So I'm just going to refresh the page. And once it's gone to closed, those changes have now been made. So if we just go to our learner's profile here, we can see updated, our RPL hours have automatically pulled through in here. And then if we go through and see the ILR has been updated with the new planned end date and the new TMP1 as well. And the planned end date of your component aims has been adjusted as well. Okie dokie. So finally, calculations around prior learning. If you watch the recording that we've got in there, it will show you how the RPL tracker works. And we've left on there some calculations of how it works in each of the different fields. You can review those in your own time and decide if this will work for you. But you do also have the option of using the tracker if you don't want to use the calculations that the tracker gives you, and you've got your own robust method of calculating the cost and duration for prior learning. You can override what the tracker suggests, and you'll still have all of the benefits that we mentioned before when using the RPL process automation tracker. Okay, next slide, Carl, please.
Shocking.
So the second point that Carl made was around TMPs and EPA costs. When you're recording your EPA costs in ATTEM, it is important that you obviously only enter the agreed cost, not an estimate, as Carl said previously. Where you have multiple EPAOs as well, registered to the one programme, we would recommend creating a different programme and representing each EPAO in that programme. So for instance, you create your programme and then you might clone that, but then look at all of the different areas where you can update your EPAO information. And we listed those here, the 3 key areas to consider when you're creating your programs that record the EPAO details. And we think if you create those programs initially with all of those details in, you'll reduce the risk of getting that wrong when it comes to audit. So for instance, within your ILR token within your program, there is a template in there. And in that template, you've got your endpoint assessment organization. And if you fill that in within the template, that will automatically fill in the ILR field when you apply the learner to the program. Similarly, for TMP2, If you obviously your TMP2 will change depending on your endpoint assessment organisation. So if you fill that in your template, that will again automatically update as you apply the learner to the programme. Within the learning plan token in the programme, we have an endpoint assessment learning plan component. And within that, you can pull through your EPAO organisation, and that will automatically fill that information and the details within the training plan compliance document for you. So again, it's automatically created for you. This is on the basis that we recommend that you create a different programme version for each of the EPAOs that you're registered with. Now, in addition to that, what we need to remember is all costs related to the endpoint assessment must be negotiated and agreed between the provider, the employer, and the endpoint assessment organisation. This can be documented in your contract, but also APTEN will provide you with a written agreement compliance document. And this details all of the costs across the apprenticeship. This can be set up at a programme level. So for everybody, it can be agreed at programme level, but then it can also be updated at specific points for learner level as well, if you have a different agreement per learner. And were there any changes to EPAOs whilst on programme, you can remember then to update the details at the learner level and then reissue the written agreement and training plan documents where needed. Okay, next slide, please, Carl. Okay, so now we're looking at our off-the-job activity and how APTEN records and monitors the off-the-job activity. So first thing to do is to pre-map your hours against your learning activity within your learning plan components. So mapping into the learning plan allows you to have the structure and planning prior to the learner being enrolled on the programme. And it also gives you then the flexibility to record any changes or any additional hours at a learner level at a later date. Learners, when submitting their evidence, then select their hours and they confirm the work was completed within work time. And the confirmation of that is that the learners has confirmed themselves and selected the statement that it is within work time where they've completed this work. In addition to that then, we've got learning plans that begin at the start of the programme, and they cannot be edited during a break in learning. And then when they return to learning, if you use the return to learning tracker, that will replan all of your learning plan components for you to reflect the new date within the period of learning. So that means that you've got more control around the off the job only being recorded within the duration of the programme. It can't be outside of those dates. And then when we're looking at your off the job, they are not actually included as progress until tutor marks the evidence that the learners submitted. The number of hours can be edited by the tutor where the evidence does not meet the claimed hours. And I think it's really important to recognise that tutors and coaches do have the final sign-off on the off-the-job activity. You're in control of this to determine whether their activity is eligible, whether all hours are accounted for, whether it relates to new learning, and that you have that final say on what you're accepting as evidence. So just to have a view of if there is ineligible activity being accepted within your learning plans, where there's an opportunity then to identify training may be needed around tutor sign off and what is actually eligible for off the job. Okay, similarly, when you get to the end of the programme, your actual hours are pulled through from the learning plan when you use the completion of programme tracker. And what this does is ensure compliance of real-time actual hours being pulled through from the marked evidence in the learning plan and then subsequently being recorded in the ILR when using the completion of programme tracker. And then using reviews to monitor your off-the-job progress helps early identification of what your expected hours are and what's not being met. And then using the review steps to record any actions towards meeting those hours and your readiness for gateway as well. And you can also record any reasons for any early completions. And last slide, please, Carl, please. Okay, and these are just a few process tips for monitoring your learners and ensuring your compliance across all activity throughout the programme. So using your IQA processes in APTEN to allow for checks for off-the-job hours and identify early where there's learning activities being signed off and it's not eligible. So definitely use your IQA processes for that. Similarly, when you're submitting your ILR, using QA Verify and the completed ILR statuses allows you to confirm that only compliant learners are being submitted in the ILR, again, giving you that control around your learners that you know are eligible. And then using your process automation trackers and your reviews to manage your changing circumstances provides automated ILR updates, standardized process, and an audit trail as well. And if you give yourself a KPI of making sure they're all processed in month before you submit your ILR, that will help as well. Okay, so before we were going to move into some final questions, but I'm conscious of time. But if we could just move on to the next slide, Karl, please. What I'd like to do is encourage you all to visit our website and explore our upcoming events. The link's been shared in the chat, and we do host a wide range of events, including our flagship customer conference, Aspire, as well as thought leadership sessions and industry conferences and award celebrations. It is worth noting that the webinar with David Lockhart-Hawkins that you will see on the screen is subject to the announcement of those draft funding rules. Hoping to hear about those soon as we know. We'll share an invite to the webinar via an email and publish the registration link on our LinkedIn profile and website. So I think that's it. We will get back to you with any answers for any questions. Is there anything you wanted to finish off on, Karl?
No, I don't think so. I think we've crammed a heck of a lot into 3 minutes.
We have, yeah. There's obviously, you can go back and watch the video, but we think we've covered everything that we needed to today. Thank you all, and thank you, Karl, for sharing your insights with us today. I'm sure you've given everyone plenty to think about moving forward. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.